BUF does have a total artistic bent to them.
French, completely French. I know.
That is probably their selling point in a way.
Yeah.
And it's the sex scene with Helena Bonham Carter, I think, that really showcases that.
Yeah.
Because again, they used this photogrammetry methods of taking stills of the actors and I think using body doubles as well.
Yeah, there was.
But the whole point is that it's not meant to be a beautiful love scene. I think even in the commentary, Fincher mentions he wanted it to look like the Statue of Liberty was having sex with Mount Rushmore or something like that. This podcast is brought to you by Befores and Afters magazine. Befores and Afters magazine is the monthly print mag from VFX journalist Ian Fales. Go in-depth on key visual effects topics with major VFX supervisors, artists and studios. Each issue covers a different area like creature animation, miniatures, on-set VFX and VFX tools. Find your copy at beforesandafters.com/magazine.
This podcast is also brought to you by Hugo's Desk new compositing course. Join today to have access to 150 pre-recorded classes, 50 hours of training, using real production assets covering industry standard techniques with over 200 gigs of showreel material and access to a private Discord channel with over 2,300 students. This course is endorsed by Foundry and has access to a Foundry student license paid separately. Join today at hugosdesk.myshopify.com. And now on to the show.
Hugo, what's the first rule of VFX Notes?
We talk about VFX Notes.
Oh, what's the second rule of VFX Notes?
We talk even more about VFX Notes.
Well, that's a little bit different than what I thought you were going to say, but does fit in to our VFX Notes methodology. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the VFX Notes Podcast, live from Hugo's bunker.
Yes.
I'm in London. Really excited to be doing an episode here in the bunker. Hugo, how are you?
Yeah,
Great to see you.
Just to prove, he is here, see? He's actually here. It's just that I don't have the fancy upper camera anymore, but he's definitely here. Look.
Love being here.
Look, he's here.
Oh, I need to clean myself with some soap.
Oh, my God.
Just soap.
Yeah, we even have props. Are you going to be okay with me slicing some random frames on this episode? I could just slice some random VFX shots.
I want to appear right in the middle of this podcast. I'm telling you now, popping up for one frame. Just every now and then, about 5 times. Is that okay?
Yeah.
You promise you'll do that?
I'll do. I was going to do that and not tell you anything. Well, no, man, that's great to see you here.
Yes, thank you. Love being in the bunker.
Yes.
It's my favorite thing with this show.
By the way, people keep hearing the bunker. This is not a bunker. It's actually on the first floor.
It's a bunker. It's a visual effects bunker. Yeah. By the way, in case you haven't worked it out, we're obviously talking about David Fincher's Fight Club today, from 1999. Big year in film and visual effects, Hugo.
The best, man.
Year.
This is the year. This is the best year in living history. I think, with the American Beauty, when the Matrix, it's just like filled with Star Wars. Like it's just like the year, you know, of movies.
And maybe the year of photogrammetry in visual effects as well. We'll get to that. Yeah. But before we roll into Fight Club, we always want to make sure that we pay tribute to our sponsors, to our Patreon supporters, and everyone who likes and subscribes to us on YouTube, Hugo. We couldn't do it without them.
No, we couldn't. Thank you so much for all the support we get offline and the lovely messages we get from everyone and the sponsors as well. And if you guys have questions for the show, just please contact us on Patreon. There's that possibility. We don't often get messages directly there, but you guys are free to do that, of course.
Yes. Awesome. Well, Fight Club. I was racking my brain trying to remember seeing this in the second half of 1999. As you say, there'd been a huge bunch of films. The Phantom Menace was one. The Matrix was another. American Beauty I also loved.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing this in a cinema in Sydney, like a bit of a divey cinema, which was kind of perfect for Fight Club. And it was one of those things where I think I'd seen the trailer, but I had not read a review and I didn't have a clue what this film was about.
Yeah.
I'm going to say when I finished watching the film, I still didn't quite know what it was about. And yet I loved it.
Yeah.
I absolutely loved it. So that's my memory, Hugo, of seeing the film back in 99. What's yours?
Man, I'll never forget it. Like I was in university on the second year of uni or third. I think I was in third year of uni. Yeah, third year. And I went to a midnight screening,
Oh,
like
wow.
first day, because I was so hot out of Seven. I was like, I'm going to see this new director, this new hip guy. David Fincher does all these cool movies. I loved the game. I loved Seven. So I thought, no, we're going to go to the premiere. Fucking packed cinema. Could not fit another person inside the cinema. And a few other people, a few friends. And everyone that was with me hated the movie. Everyone.
Did they?
Yes. And this was art people, like from my school. They fucking hated the movie. And I loved the movie. I was like, my God, this is the best movie I've ever seen in my life.
Why do you think they hated it?
I think the film is not easy the first time you watch it. I think the film is just like very, very encrypted. And there's a lot of things that you only really get the second time you watch it. And I think you have to be really, really on edge to what you have to have a lot of attention because there's so many things happening at the same time that the film is not, I don't think the film is very easy in that way.
Yeah.
But for some reason, I was completely open at the time to watch it. I was really into it. Over the years, I've kind of like, I don't think I like it I still love it, but it's not like that first time. I was blown away by it. That's the way I can describe it. I was really blown away by it.
I remember being blown away by it. I remember thinking that the press had been obsessed with the Fight Club side of the film and fight clubs in America. And then thinking the film isn't really even about that at all.
At all. No.
And that's something I really remember to this day. Yeah, I remember thinking Brad Pitt was at the height of his Brad Pittness in this film, Hugo. He really was, Edward Norton, sometimes I think he's Edward Furlong, not the same actor at all, was perfect as the narrator in this role. I didn't know much about Fincher. You had said just before you were obsessed with Seven
and Aliens 3 as well. I've watched all of them before. So I went to the cinema to see Aliens 3 and then Seven and then the game. So I was all in with David Fincher. And I knew his work from commercials and music videos as well.
Yes.
And so from all that generation of Chris Cunningham and Michel Gondry, and I had these DVDs from the directors. And so David Fincher was already kind of a name that I knew about from that side, from weird commercials and weird music videos, So.
And of course, I mean, it's so funny saying that now that I didn't really know him, but to think he was at ILM as well as a cameraman.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just pretty crazy. That history in visual effects. It wasn't until many years later that I sort of started rewatching David Fincher films.
Yeah.
And probably now put him like in the top 5 of my directors. Yeah. Easily.
Yeah.
And I would say Fight Club is probably the top David Fincher film.
Yeah.
In my book anyway. What about you?
Well, for me, Seven still takes the cake. I think Seven is a masterpiece. And I think Fight Club is also a masterpiece, and I think it's its second most accomplished film. But I think Seven is just like this hallmark. It changes really how films are in thrillers and investigation movies and police movies. It really changes. Fight Club is different. I think Fight Club was just a subversive, like really weird movie at the time. And I understand. I think maybe I was very into commercials and very into music videos. And I was at art school at the time. I was doing video art. I was doing crazy stuff. And I really kind of looked at Fight Club as a reflection of that environment of experimentation it's basically his most experimental movie, if you think about it. But I agree with you. Like David Fincher, I'll be honest, David Fincher, I used to like David Fincher more than I do now. I just feel that his last movies have really not landed with me. I didn't really like The Killer. I thought, it's okay. It was a bit boring for me, and I didn't really like Gone Girl, and I really didn't like the film the Monk as well. I just feel that his last great movie for me was Girl with a Dragon Tattoo and Network. I don't know. I haven't. I hope he comes back to his roots, but it's just been on a downward spiral for me. Like for my personal taste, I just haven't really enjoyed his last movies as much as I enjoyed the first ones. So
I did like The Killer. I didn't like the ending of it, but I think The Killer was brilliant. And you can't go past Social Network and Benjamin Button as
Social Network is a fantastic movie.
Yeah,
It's really fantastic. Very ahead of its time. I think people don't really realize at the time no one cared. But now knowing what we know now and how social media is taking over the world and the way Zach Zuckerberg is just a weirdo, and the whole thing makes sense now if you really think about it. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I think we knew, but even worse.
I know, but
even
at the time, I don't think the film landed. I think people didn't really. Maybe if it was released 10 years later, it would have landed even more. I think the film, So going back to Fight Club, I think I have a really big connection to this film because this film, I loved it on the cinema, then went to see a second time. As soon as the DVD came out, I bought the DVD right away. It was this magnificent special edition, which was pretending to be a wrapped, soap bar. And this DVD is really formative for me because it is a masterclass on how a DVD is. It's filled with behind the scenes. It's filled with actual visual effects behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And there's an audio commentary, which is brilliant as well. It's with David Fincher and all the actors. And this, I think this is one of the best DVDs ever created. And David Fincher actually talks about it on the commentary, in the new commentary, because there's another commentary done for the 10th anniversary, which is a really good Blu-ray, but it's a really weak, it's just this, compared to this thing, which is this beautiful book with discs and a booklet and everything. I think, it's a shame that it's such a worse edition, but he talks about this DVD as being very successful, as being a cash cow. It was one of the most successful DVDs from 20th Century Fox ever.
Yes. And it definitely came at a time when they invested a lot in DVDs because people used to buy them.
Yeah.
But then people were obsessed, like us, with the multi-angle view, the commentaries, the documentaries that they spent time on.
It's amazing.
Especially the visual effects one in there is brilliant, and they've got a lot of B-roll.
They split it by each VFX, and then they have audio commentaries from different people. They have the audio commentary for the artist that worked on the shot, and the audio commentary for the overall supervisor, and the audio commentary for the DOP that shot. It's just unheard of.
Yeah.
And at the time when I was at school, I was still in university. I was trying to become a director, and I'm still trying to become a director. And I it's been a long time, but I was doing video art, I was doing music videos, I was doing short films, and this became my school. This DVD together with Seven's DVD, and together also with Any Given Sundays DVD, and there's a few of them that are masterclasses in cinema. And then the new edition is even better, because this one, I don't know if people know, but this is really cheap, by the way. It's £7. This 10th anniversary has 3 new additional commentaries.
Right.
So you have the audio commentary just from David Fincher. Then you have the audio commentary from the DOP and the VFX artists, and also the production designer, and then an extra commentary just from the writer of the book and the screenwriter.
Right.
So those are the extras that they've put it. And then there's a couple of new documentaries that they have with interviews, and so it's just a few more things than that one. And then it has also all the stuff that DVD has. It's a really good edition as well. It's 10 years old already. And by the way, I forgot to mention the reason why we're doing this.
Oh, well, yeah.
Why we're doing this episode.
The obvious reason is that it's the 25th anniversary of the film.
You feel old now? Because I do.
I feel old, except that this year, as we say, 1999 anniversary films have been thick and fast.
Yeah.
So I felt old with Phantom Menace was 25, when The Matrix was 25. This is almost just another one, you know, on the list.
And it's quite special because we're basically releasing it around the time of the anniversary of the film itself. Yeah. And we're recording it now. We're recording it in October, just before you go to the V conference. Like we're basically in it. That's the anniversary phase. And so I hope people can go back and rewatch it and give it another chance, and maybe new audiences can watch it as well, because I think it still holds up really well, the film. And so, yeah, maybe let's talk about that real quick. Like now we talked about our experience on watching the movie. What do you think about the movie itself? Like you know, about how it is, and what do you think?
Well, like as I always do when we talk about these films, I always try and remember my experience watching it.
Yeah.
And apart from the story of Fight Club, which is thick and complex and, you know, is open to interpretation, I think the fun thing, of course, with Fight Club is, and big spoiler here, you know, that Tyler Durden is not real. Yeah. Is what you have to remember that, right?
God damn it, Ian. You're spoiling the film for everyone. Don't do that. At least tell people, spoiler alert. I'll put a sign on the corner.
That's super clever. But then what's even more clever, and this goes to how I feel about the movie, is that once you learn that there's hints of it during the film, you know, that actually probably would be tricky to watch in a 35mm screening, like when on opening night, you know, or a midnight screening, you probably didn't notice, for example, the flashes of the character, or the part where Tyler points up to the projectionist changeover thing.
Yeah.
When you rewatch the film, you're like, oh, I know what that is, you know. and I'm just gonna say that for me is a big part of the film. They're not just clever little things that Fincher's added. They mean things in the film because it's an interpretation of Ed Norton's mind, you know, when he's going crazy, basically.
Yeah.
But I just think when I think about the film and what I remember about what I liked about it so much, it's those things, Hugo.
Yeah. Well, yeah, absolutely. I remember like it's yesterday, and when I saw the movie the first time in the cinema, I only noticed 2 times the Brad Pitt frames.
Right.
There's 4, so he shows up 4 times. I've only recently finally saw the last one, the 4th one.
Yeah.
Because the 4th one is not a frame. It's like he's part of the background on a screen. So it's a bit different. The 4th one is harder to notice. But I think, if we talk about, even before talking about the film itself for me was a big deal because I watched the movie. I loved it so much. And then I went to read the book. I read the book in Portuguese at the time, which was a big mistake. I really don't recommend, because in Portugal, of course, they translate movies translate books like usually in all countries. I recently, about 10 years ago, I read the original in English.
Oh, yeah.
Much better. And the book is amazing. It's not exactly the same as the film, but it is. Like it's one of the best translations from a book to a film that I've ever seen. Like when you're reading the book is very visual, and so it kind of connects really well. I think David Fincher did an amazing job transferring, not only David Fincher but also the writer, Jim Hulls. He did an amazing job on transferring what Chuck Palahniuk did into the screen, which is chaos, basically organized chaos. I also read a few books from him, other books, as well. He's a really good writer. He's actually on a commentary, in the audio commentary. He loves the film, by the way. He really loves the film. And so from that point of view, I think the story is fantastic. And I think it's sometimes misunderstood. I feel some people think the film is about hyperviolence, and some people think the film is about these group of men that are terrorists. I don't think the film is really about that. I think that's it's of course it's much more critical than I think people give it justice for. I really think that it's really showcasing these lunatics, really,
I mean, I think it is, but I'm going to be the first person to say I'm not exactly sure what the film is about.
Yeah.
But that's a good thing.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. It leaves a lot of interpretation, of course.
Really, you in my memory, it's inside the mind of Ed Norton's character, right? And just about that descent into madness.
Yeah.
And that's enough for me.
Yeah.
There's definitely the terrorism stuff around it and his relationship with Marla and all that kind of thing. But, this is probably why, Hugo, the film didn't actually necessarily do bananas big business. I mean, I think it was about a 60 mil budget and made over $100 million.
Yeah.
The DVD stuff did well, I think.
Yeah, that was like David Fincher says, a cash cow.
It also came out at a time that now films that get released for awards consideration tend to come out. But I think originally it was even probably supposed to be a summer release and then just got delayed a bit till America's fall. And I mean, who cares how well it does? It's such a brilliant film. I just think sometimes that also plays into what people remember of this film. They're like, oh, I love Brad Pitt and I love Ed Norton and I love Helena Bonham Carter, but I don't actually remember what happened in the film and what it's about. But Fight Club does have all this aura around it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
For the fighting, for the soap, for the visual effects, frankly, as well.
Yeah. I feel the film is a lot deeper than probably people give it credit for. I feel the film is really a reflection of a generation that was really defranchised and really like starting to become really to turn against the United States and all this new generation of people that are being marketed and being convinced that they're going to be better than it's an entire generation of disillusion, really. And I really think the writer Chucky really tapped into that mindset of mental health, of people having crappy jobs and wanting more and trying to search for more. And there's also like this subplot of corporate greed as well on the film about the insurance companies and the crummy things they do, and it also bringing down the credit companies as well. There's a lot of areas, I think, and there's a lot of facets, and I really truly believe the book, the film is very deep in that sense from a philosophical point of view. The
anarchist side of it is big, and of course this is a pre-September 11 film, and so I'm curious what it would have been post-September 11. I mean, the book was obviously written.
Probably wouldn't have been released. I mean, they had a few, or it would have been postponed, or famously, I was quite surprised by this. David Fincher, on the commentary, especially on the 10th anniversary commentary, he's actually quite surprised himself that the studio didn't really interfere much, and so they were very keen into the film. They were happy with the film. There was a couple of things only that they wanted to change. Famously there's a couple of sentences that Marla says that they wanted to really change. Like when she says, I haven't been screwed by like this since grade school. That sentence they wanted to change, but the original sentence from the book is, I want to have your abortion. So that was even worse. And so they recorded both versions, and then one in the studio kept bouncing around. So those things. And then when the fighting sequences happen, there was a couple of concessions where David Fincher had to remove some shots and had to make it a bit shorter. And there was like, the studio asked if they couldn't have less reaction shots of the people really cheering the fighting. So there was those little things, but all in all, the movie was not interfered. And David Fincher really remembers having directorial cut on the film, which is very surprising for me for such a weird film, and such a violent film. Even the sexual images and pornographic images pass through as well.
Well, they're quite stylized.
They are, exactly. They're quite stylized. But even the frames, the genitalia that shows up on the frames on the middle of the film when he's slicing pornographic frames on the cinema, or even at the end of the film, those things showed up, and the studio didn't really care either. Actually, funnily enough, the only people that noticed those things and made a comment about it was the projectionists. When the film came into the projectionist booth, David Fincher and 20th Century Fox would get notes back saying, "Oh, you guys have a mistake on the film. There's like this lost frame. You should probably take it out. That maybe it was a cutting error." So there's like those kind of things that he gets notes, or even there was a really famous note where when they have the car accident, Edward Norton gets saved by Brad Pitt on the driver's seat, but he was supposed to be on the other seat, and then so they get notes like, "Oh, there's a continuity problem." And like David Fincher's like replying to him, "Well, maybe watch until the end." Like you'll understand. So the film was really funny in that sense when it came out, because the film was groundbreaking in terms of the visual aesthetic. I think that's what I remember the most. And now watching it, I watched it now 3 times for this show, because of the commentaries. The film really stands for that visual. The visual language of the film is stunning. The way it's filmed, the editing pace, so the lighting, the color correction, the contrast, the visual effects. The film looks like a film of today. And at the time in '99, it was absolutely groundbreaking the way this film looked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember some criticism of these era of films, and actually it came out of Seven a little bit.
Yeah.
That the general public used to describe them as very dark.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And of course, some of it was where you watched it. And I think if you watched it in a great cinema, you saw the work by the DOP, Jeff Cronenweth, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And Hugo, I think, I've been a fan of his work for ages. He's sort of done some many David Fincher films, but some other good ones as well. I remember.
Oh, he did 1 Hour Photo, which is a astonishing movie.
Also, go and watch K-19.
Yeah, it's a great
submarine film for the look of it, at least.
Yeah.
Is fantastic. But he continued that look in Social Network, even. A film about social media. It just has that David Fincher, Jeff Cronenweth look.
That's the film we need to do on the show, because it's although it's brighter, a lot brighter, but I know what you mean about the darkness. In fact, on the audio commentary with all the actors, when they're all together with David Fincher, they keep joking with David Fincher. It's like Brad Pitt is always like he does this like 20 times during the commentary. "Hey David, why is it so dark?" Like he keeps like saying that. "Hey, that's so dark. Did you guys underexpose the shot?" Like he keeps joking with him the whole time.
Yeah, and I know he's joking, but isn't it because he's in shadow though? A lot, which of course plays into the character. But you just have to watch that in the right setting, and I bet people saw this on TV.
Yeah, and
it was a bad transfer.
And the Blu-rays are not very good either. Yeah. Like there's no HDR.
I bet that changes the way people feel about this film.
I'm assuming this film is going to have a special 4K transfer. They lost the plot because it should have been this year for the 25th. I'm assuming they're going to do it for the 30th because there's no HDR version of this movie. And so there's only an HD version of this movie. I know David Fincher is quite busy right now doing the 4K transfer HDR of 7. They're doing it for next year, for releasing it next year for the anniversary. And so I'm assuming Fight Club is next, because he's doing slowly all of the remasters of all these films. He's just did the 4K transfer of the game as well. And so I'm assuming he's going to go through all of them like Cameron has been doing, James Cameron. People get a bit older and they probably want to leave their legacy down or something. But yeah, from a visual point of view, Jeff Cronenweth, the DOP, which, by the way, this is a really funny movie because you have the DOP, he's really famous now, but at the time, this was his first film.
Right.
First film as a DOP.
Yeah.
And his father is really famous because it's the DOP of Blade Runner. So his father is also really famous, but now he became super famous as well. And then the camera operator is also a very famous DOP. That's Conrad H. Hall, which is the son of Conrad Hall from American Beauty.
Oh.
And so it's really strange because you have these two sons of really famous DOPs working on this movie. And Conrad H. Hall has done, he did Panic Room. He was the DOP of Panic Room. And then he did DOP of Olympus Has Fallen and The Punisher. Not so amazing movies, but Panic Room is amazing as well. And he was a great DOP on that film. So that's a peculiar story there of having these two. But again, I think that's why the film is so modern, because these are quite young at the time. They're new DOPs. They're new people in the business. They have a a fresh take into this thing, and they come from David Fincher comes from the commercial market, and he comes from the music video market, and so there's a lot of things in the film that are very commercial, like the IKEA commercial with the motion control and the photogrammetry things, like you said, and the cameras moving in and out of the kitchen exploding. Those kind of shots were non-existing before, like we saw them in commercials, we saw them in music videos, but that was not a typical thing.
And importantly, they're not actually there just for spectacle. They're point of view shots, or they're inside the mind of the narrator, right? Or actually they're whatever you want them to be in some ways. And Fincher was looking for a way to achieve those, and we'll go into them in detail, but I feel in sometimes the age of virtual cameras and virtual cinematography and virtual sets, which is around this era, we actually got a lot of those sorts of shots that were unmotivated, but doable. Therefore, filmmakers grabbed them, did them. Often it came from, some sort of great previz that you could do, would move the camera anywhere. And, I just think in Fight Club, they were motivated by the story, by the mental health of the narrator. And I think that's what makes them work. As opposed to flashy.
And this, you're absolutely right. And this film also marks the start of David Fincher's obsession with visual effects, because before this film, the game only has one VFX shot, which is the breaking of the glass on the beginning. 7, I don't believe has any VFX shots, probably only physical. I don't believe it has any digital VFX. And of course, Aliens 3, which was a bad experience for him anyway, has some VFX. But I think this is the start of Fincher with invisible VFX. That's the start. From this moment on, then you go to Benjamin Button, and then you go to Zodiac, and you go to all those films, and now you go all the way to The Killer, where, in my personal view, I think it has too many VFX shots. It's like The Killer is just a bit obsessive already. So I think Fight Club marks the start of not only the type of VFX they're making, but also this language of using VFX to make shots that are not creatures, aliens or weapons or spaceships, or because that's what VFX was done for at the time. So it's a shift. You had The Matrix with a lot of sci-fi. They had Star Wars with a lot of creatures, of course, and then you have Jurassic Park with a lot of creatures. But this is kind of mundane things, like trash bins and vans and explosives, and I think it's the start of a way of making movies that David Fincher starts here.
I mean, and he knew how to do it from a little bit of history, but he's also experimenting, especially here with BUF and photogrammetry. But I don't know if he's obsessed with visual effects. I know what you mean by that, and you can trace an amazing collection of visual effects history through David Fincher films.
For the invisible VFX, for sure.
And you're right. If it's the invisible effects thing is the thing, but also effects that mean something, or as I keep saying, are motivated by something. And I was really impressed just with the photogrammetry stuff. Maybe we should launch
we can jump to that. Before we do that, I didn't mean to say. Let me explain before I get 8 emails, like 8 comments. I just feel that Killer has a lot of things in there, especially if you look at the breakdowns, that don't necessarily need to be a VFX shot. That's what I meant. Like, I feel like sometimes David Fincher lately have been a bit like that. There's some certain shots that could have been done practical, and some of them could have been done in location. And I understand that maybe it's cheaper this way. I just feel that it's not just because it's cheaper. I think David Fincher has become more and more clinical with his work. And I think it started with Gone Girl, where things are so perfect and so clean and so treated that for me, I miss the dirty David Fincher, the 7, the Fight Club David Fincher. David Fincher that would do weird stuff, and sometimes the shots wouldn't be perfect. I don't believe that it has to be so clinically correct. I feel that's what's, for me personally, distracting me out of his films right now. I think it misses some of the experimentation, handheld, and some of the grit that these films have.
Okay.
That's what I miss.
There's probably a lot going on there. There's actually a couple of, I'm sure, video essays I've watched on YouTube about David Fincher's approach, and one of the evolutions is his team and him are doing so much in editorial.
Yeah.
With what we normally would say as visual effects shots.
Yeah.
And we all know what that means, is split screens and,
different
swapping
performances.
We're all doing it, or filmmakers doing it. But someone has definitely gone and analyzed how much David Fincher's been doing that in films and the TV series that he's worked on as well, streaming series. And there's an argument that he goes a bit far and makes the frame a bit too perfect. I mean, he's already known for doing a million takes, right?
Yeah, well, they talk about that on the commentary all the time.
Yeah.
And they actually are quite critical of him. Well, of course, they're all friends, all three of them, but they joke with him a lot about that,
But I heard the coolest thing about that the other day. It wasn't from David Fincher. I can't remember who said it, some actor. And it was like, well, here we are on set or on location. It's been built. We've spent the money.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't we try? This is about multiple takes. Why wouldn't we try and get the best possible thing we can get in an expensive setting?
Yeah.
Now, of course, someone's going to say, yeah, okay, but you can't go over, or you shouldn't go over, or if you do lots of takes, then you're taking away time that could be spent doing other things. But when that perspective was given to me, which is, why wouldn't we try? I think that makes more sense to me now.
It does. No, I get you, and that's a very.
We're talking about something different now from visual effects.
I know. I apologize, everyone. You can skip a couple. Go to the chapters. There's chapters about everything. I always keep telling people there's chapters, and you can just jump in through the chapters. I get you, and I think if people thought that Kubrick did a lot of takes, then David Fincher comes and hold my beer. That's kind of the thing, because Kubrick would do like 20, 30. David Fincher does 100, 70, 60s, things like that. And Edward Norton and Edward Norton actually tells a really funny story on the commentary, saying that the first time of shooting, he never filmed with David Fincher, So he did the first week and came into the first day, did his acting, and then David Fincher, okay, we go again, and we go again, and we go again. And by the 30th time, he was like, oh man, this is not going well. I'm probably going to be fired. He thought he was going to be fired because he thought he was doing something wrong. Yeah. And then he understood, oh, this is how he films. Okay. Yeah. Then he got it. But I know what you mean. I feel, not everyone is like Clint Eastwood that does one take, but that's fine. Like Clint Eastwood is known for that. Ridley Scott is also known for doing very few takes. And there are some directors that don't really do that at all, and they rehearse a lot. That's the thing that people don't know. Sometimes I think more David Fincher is a very digital-driven guy, not at Fight Club, but now is all digital. And I don't think he doesn't really like to rehearse. He just films, and that's the rehearsal. These are filming and filming and filming, but it's digital. Who cares? It's digital. It doesn't really matter. Other directors might be rehearsing for several days, and then they just do a take, but they've been rehearsing for several days. So if you want to really be picky about it, that's different takes anyway, because you're doing rehearsals. Yeah. So it's all a semantics thing, really, to be honest. And I think people don't really get it because they never been on set. And when you're on set, man, all sorts of things happen. Improvisation happens, something else happens, a light shows up, a corner of the set becomes interesting, something that someone says. It's a different vibe. Sometimes you need to experiment to get to something. And like David Fincher also says on the commentary, there's a lot of things. There's shots on this full movie where they did 30 takes and he used the first one on the movie, Funnily enough, he's talking, when Brad Pitt throws Edward Norton out of the staircase on the parking lot, they did that shot with a stuntman 14 times and they took the first take.
Wow. Wow.
And the guy was already sore, like he was like, it was like, and of course the guy never complained because, he's a stuntman. He's never going to complain. So he's probably had a bad day a few days later.
But,
so,
how that relates to visual effects is I can see that there might have been a more clinical side of the work coming into David Fincher's film.
I just think that now these days he's making his movies later and not on set. He's like, especially when you look at The Killer, a lot of the film is filmed there, but then there's a gigantic proportion of the film that is done later on the perfect condition, like laboratory, where you can really pinpoint things. And that is, as I'm not, I'm a very, very, very small time director. I only did a few shorts and a few commercials, but for me, I don't work that way. I like to get something on set, and I prefer to get on it, to do it. For me, it's more like the way of Steven Soderbergh working. Like, he just does it really quickly and just moves on. I think David Fincher lately has been lingering too much on productions, and he's been taking too long to do these things, because I do, hearing him on interviews and hearing the commentaries, kind of sounds to me like he's a bit obsessive. That's kind of like the feeling I have. Yeah. And I think Fight Club is not that, because Fight Club is a different time in his career, and it's film, it's 35 millimeter, it's not the same. You can't really don't have a huge budget. So, but anyway, let's start diving into the VFX, I think.
Yeah. Well, maybe just before we talk about any individual sequences, I want to praise here the visual effects designer, which is Kevin Tod Haug. I'm not always sure how to pronounce his surname. Sorry, Kevin. We're going to catch up next week in the View conference.
Oh, you're going to be there?
Yeah. I have just basically, since the game, loved Kevin's work, and he's always been a visual effects supervisor / designer, which is what he describes himself as, with something different. Really not doing superhero films or
he does really strange movies. That's what people would put it.
And this is one, and then Panic Room, of course, The Cell,
Stranger Than Fiction.
I love Stranger Than Fiction. It has some great stuff in it. He also did Quantum of Solace, which has some interesting visual effects. In very recent times, he was the visual effects supervisor on at least the first series of American Gods. Which has some fantastic visual effects work.
That's right.
And he most recently did this slightly crazy submarine film called Commandante, which used some real-time rendering and virtual production techniques. If you can find Commandante, it's really interesting.
Okay.
And but Kevin's a really nice guy, kind of an old school visual effects guy as well.
Fight Club was one of his first films that he was supervising. So he was right on the cusp of that era of a lot of experimentation and starting all these things, like where they were really figuring out shit while they would go along, and, which is really interesting.
Yeah. And I think the only other thing I want to say before we get into the shots and sequences, I have this thing, Hugo, where I think if this film was released today, with exactly this kind of visual effects work, Fight Club is the kind of film that would actually be in the top running to win the visual effects Oscar.
Yeah. In
terms of the way the visual effects are implemented into the story.
Yeah, absolutely.
1999 was a really tough year.
And it wasn't the type of film that would win.
Back then it wasn't. No.
Like,
and clearly The Matrix had incredible stuff with bullet time, as did Phantom Menace with CG characters and whatnot.
Yeah.
The other nominee that year, apart from Phantom Menace and Matrix, was Stuart Little, which had incredible character work.
Yeah.
I don't even think Fight Club got into the Bake Off.
Don't believe so. No. I don't think. You can ask Kevin, but I don't think it did.
No, it didn't.
No.
And that's just representative of the way it used to work. There used to only be 3 films that got in the final nominations. And, 1999, as we keep saying, was a pretty big year in visual effects. So, but I just think we've moved on a bit.
Yeah.
And
it would have won,
for
sure.
Yeah, we now love that kind of integrated kind of visual effects filmmaking. But anyway.
It would have won editing as well, if it was now. I think it would have won editing. It would have won VFX, potentially DOP. I just feel that it was a different time. The film is very ahead of itself. the film is really at least 10 years before it became normal to do films like that.
Yeah,
And I think it's testament to David Fincher and his team, where they created something so radical at the time that it still holds up today. Like I think it's so well shot and so well edited and so well accomplished. Even on the VFX side, it's really stunning VFX. I think the only thing that didn't survive until now is the shaders and reflectors, because it's basically done with how shaders used to work on the 90s, the reflections of them.
Yeah,
it was done with radiosity.
Yeah,
so
they
it
tended
was
to use radiosity, not ray tracing.
exactly, and not global illumination. So it has that look, unfortunately, especially the Galaxy of Trash. That's the shot that is more dated, I believe, in terms of the look of it.
I think it looks dated, but it does fit the whole point of view of the shot. Yeah,
absolutely, it does. It does, and that could also explain why there's no 4K version. It might be difficult to create a 4K version of this film. It might be, but yeah, I and also the visual effects as well. Or I'm not saying it's an afterthought, but there wasn't a large budget allocated to the VFX because the film was not supposed to have so many VFX.
That's true. We'll talk about it, but even the plane crash, I rewatched it. It's only like 6 or 7 or 8 seconds.
Yeah.
I reckon with the big budget and maybe a film now, you would have staged that a different way. Yeah. Maybe Fincher wouldn't. Maybe that's Fincher. But it's so quick.
Yeah.
A lot of work by the team. But so yes, things go by very quickly in this film.
They do.
Yeah.
And things were not supposed to, as David Fincher explains on the commentaries, the film was really going to have that shot and it was going to have the opening credits. There was a few things that were allocated to happen, and the explosions as well at the end, but all the photogrammetry stuff, like his kitchen and all that stuff, and the fly through outside the building into the car, into the bombs, those things were really not really thought through at the time. They didn't really thought they were going to do it like that. I think it has to do with the breakthroughs that were happening at the time with photogrammetry and how visual effects was really going fast. The revolution was happening quite quickly. And so, and David Fincher was really on top of it because of the commercial work that he had. And because of his he does speak on the commentary that he was obsessed with Michel Gondry's visual effects on the Rolling Stones music video, and also basically the work that Chris Cunningham was doing. Like all these directors that were doing really stunning things in visual effects at the time, at the Mill and with ILM as well, and those things kind of started spilling into this film, and because it wasn't supposed to have so much. You know?
Well, so I am obsessed, actually, Hugo, with the way that photogrammetry and image-based modeling is used in this film.
Yeah.
And I think there's a really fascinating history that can be traced to things that BUF, they were in Paris or are in Paris, a really long-standing visual effects studio, had done for like a train commercial. With basically stereogrammetry.
Yeah.
And then they'd done it in this Rolling Stones music video with Michel Gondry, where essentially it was kind of like Frozen Time, but not really. It was using, again, stereogrammetry to create that eerie sort of move between characters and get the camera to change perspective on them. And then they developed it more for commercials, right?
Yeah.
And then here's this film that needs camera fly-throughs and different perspectives, but you would probably do today with CG assets, buildings, literally stovetops, and CG digidoubles. But back in 1998, 99, it was hard to render those, right?
Possible.
So image-based modeling, photogrammetry was the right tool for the job.
Yeah.
And of course, The Matrix had done that with photogrammetry for the backgrounds, the virtual backgrounds in bullet time. Star Wars Episode 1 Phantom Menace had done it for capturing, and we've got an episode about Phantom Menace where we've talked about this as well, where in that desert Tatooine pod race sequence, they were using the similar techniques to acquire, high resolution imagery of big messes and mushroom rocks and things like that. So things were kind of coming together from research, things that Paul Debevic had been doing, but also individual stuff that BUF had been doing, and other people were playing with tools like electric image to do this. And the industry was sort of like, oh, photogrammetry and image-based modeling and image-based rendering, we can use that for like high-end visual effects work.
Yeah.
That's what was happening, right?
Absolutely.
And it's cool that David Fincher saw that and realized it could be done. And Kevin Tod as well.
Yeah, exactly. Those three shots that really take advantage of the kitchen explosion, and then the fly through of the building outside, and also the sex scene as well. Those shots, and also the Galaxy of Trash. Although the Galaxy of Trash is a bit different because they ended up doing full radiosity on that shot because it was so many reflective surfaces. And the funny thing is that this is so quaint. They say it on the commentary that it was taking a day per frame to render. that people don't really realize how hard this is. Yeah. Now you can just do that on Unreal in an afternoon, and it will probably look better than the one on the film. To a point that David Fincher asked BUF, "Oh, it's lovely, it's beautiful. We need to tweak it though." And BUF said, "Well, it's only 7 weeks to the film, so you're only going to be able to render it once more time. Like you can only render it once again." Yeah. And so
I think it used to take 2 weeks, some of these frames, not just a day. So yeah.
I think that it was just a different world. But no, I and you guys should go and watch the DVD, man. You even see soft image and them working on soft image while they're with David Fincher. You see the screens, you see the wireframes, you see the renders coming through on the Silicon Graphics, on the O2s. It's just such a time capsule. We don't see these anymore, and so it's really beautiful.
Yes, Hugo, I don't think we can overstate how influential photogrammetry has been to pretty much everything that came after this. And just the kind of pioneering nature of BUF's work, who kind of just, made their own little software to do it, and perhaps still do, and just they still use it. They use it in so many different ways in their current work as well. And it was kind of like that era too of visual effects studios having a bit of a secret weapon. Yeah. BUF used it even more in Panic Room, of course. And I just think, as I keep saying, it was serving the story point of being able to show these POVs really well, and crazy camera moves. I think one thing we should point out, though, is that they took ideas from Fincher, ideas in storyboards, and ideas from previz to get to their final work. Previz was also relatively new. Yeah. And here it was Colin Green from PLF, Pixel Liberation Front. I wish that company was still around. They used to just have the coolest behind the scenes, because you're basically seeing really wireframey graphical stuff, tech viz and previz. And I think some things were working really well together here, which is getting an idea about what these shots would look like from previz, and then BUF doing its stuff. Later on, of course, Digital Domain did some stuff for other sequences we'll talk about, and Doc Bailey and a few other companies. But previz was a really big thing on this film too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you see all the previz on the Blu-ray as well. And we talked about that on Star Wars as well, episode 1, but previz was was used, of course, on some films, but this is also the first time I think David Fincher really goes deep into using previz to trying to not only tell the actors what's going to happen, but also set the tone to where the cameras were going to be, what kind of moves they're going to do, and really start experimenting on that side. So there's that entire new way of filming. That's all very fresh, and because people wouldn't do those kind of things, that didn't really exist. I mean, we've talked about on the show a few times where we had a few previz on Twister, and we had a little bit of preview on Star Wars, and it just became, now it's an industry standard. But yeah, it became really, for this it became really important because, they did a previz, and then they would have to go to these rooms and to these locations and photograph the hell out of them.
Yeah.
And without having a previous sequence, I guess, how would they even know where to begin with? You know? Especially on the kitchen, they were so close to the where you have the gas pipes and everything. They were so close behind the refrigerator. They had to know exactly where the camera was going to flow over.
Yeah, and it's so funny when you watch some of the docos or the commentary. It's so funny to hear about why Fincher chose this previz and then photogrammetry approach. Like for the kitchen scene, part of it was he was obsessed with the teapot, wasn't he? And he was like, well, how am I going to get a great close-up shot of the teapot without the camera being in the reflection? Yeah. And of course, now we'd paint it out, or we'd obviously render it in CG. Yeah. But back then,
that was not an option.
It was like, okay, well, we use our image-based modeling and image-based rendering approach to take hundreds, not thousands, by the way, but hundreds of photos of the room and everything in it on film back then as well.
I'm assuming it's 35. It wouldn't be digital.
Yeah. And so then, because we can then create a digital scene, but with these great textures from photogrammetry and image-based modeling, we can run a virtual camera through the scene and you will not see the camera lens.
Yeah.
It's weird to talk about now because we wouldn't even worry about it. But back then it was actually helping Fincher do this kind of shot that he wanted to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which then became 10 times more complex on Panic Room. On Panic Room, he goes through the kitchen and through the in of the cup, he goes through all those things.
But for a different reason, for tension. Yeah. Well, I think that's what he was going for. There.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. This is just a different thing. And it's also like the way the camera is moving. I know it's a bit quaint because we always complain on this show about, the camera shouldn't be flying around and doing weird things. And that's true. And that happened a lot on the 90s and it happened a lot in the 2000s. But these shots are specifically in purpose. The camera is crazy, but it works so well because they all happen in the middle of a montage. So, Edward Norton is explaining something, and then you have these beats like from the Dust Brothers, and then you have these rotations around the cup, and you have the rotations around the stove, and you have it exploding. It's like the editing of music video influences and editing of commercials, of being very stylized and synchronized with the music beat, and the whole thing just works. It's not like a crazy camera move from like The Mummy Returns or something. It's not like that. It's really, really specifically built just for that shot, for that little piece of montage. And it doesn't exist in other parts of the movie. So because it only appears a few times, I think actually those big crazy camera moves only happens twice on the film.
Right.
So, and it's just like The Matrix. In The Matrix, you only have 3 time bullets, and those are just enough.
Yeah.
And then what happened later on in 2010, and films started having these shots repeated through the film, and then it becomes too much. And so I think the way David Fincher and his team and the 3D team and the CG team handle these are just magnificent because they made them quite short and very story driven. I don't even know how you would show. How do you show this without having this? Like, because he's talking about the pilot going up and then the explosion of the building over. Doing it practically wouldn't look like that.
No.
You would just see a kitchen exploding. That was it. Or maybe a close-up of the pilot going up. It would have to be edited. And this is just a single shot. It's just beautiful.
And it allowed him to, I guess, go slow-mo. Or do speed
and macro photography as well. He goes between the little holders of the floor as well. And I was obsessed with these shots. Like when I was young, the only thing I wanted to do was to do photogrammetry and try to repeat this. But this is like you go from 99, which I had a shitty computer. I couldn't really do this. Like it wasn't really, that's the other thing. This kind of stuff is just really, really top end at the time. I know it's really quaint and easy to do now, but this is really difficult. Like, this is incredibly difficult work to render, to texture, to process. The amount of time you have to photograph in film, then you have to scan the film. The films all have to be color corrected so they all match. You have to clean the film, all the scratches. Then you have to load them to these silicon graphic computers, which costed a fortune. Like, you're talking like $1 million for the fucking computer. Then you had to like wait a day to even see a frame. And then you had to wait 3 weeks to see the whole sequence. Then you would look at it. Oh, we need to change this. And then you would wait another 3 weeks to see it. It's just nuts.
Yeah. And then on top of that, I think the important thing is it still felt gritty.
Yeah.
And that was probably the difference between what you're saying now with his films compared to back then. BUF does have a total artistic bent to them.
French, completely French. I know.
That is probably their selling point in a way.
Yeah.
And it's the sex scene with Helena Bonham Carter, I think, that really showcases that.
Yeah.
Because again, they used this photogrammetry methods of taking stills of the actors and I think using body doubles as well.
Yeah, there was.
But the whole point is that it's not meant to be a beautiful love scene. I think even in the commentary, Fincher mentions he wanted it to look like the Statue of Liberty was having sex with Mount Rushmore or something like that. And he meant it to be blocky.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
In the end, it's not so blocky. It's sort of almost ethereal,
Yeah.
But sometimes
because of the motion blur.
Blur, right? That's what they've added to it to give it that feel. Sometimes the characters feel like they have two heads or partial heads. But I've watched that sequence and I'm like, I still can't really tell how BUF actually pulled it off from the live action shoot to photogrammetry methods to whatever they were doing for rendering and
highly inspired by Francis Bacon. Really, it looks like Francis Bacon paintings, that thing with the two heads and the gore and everything. And this is really incredibly hard. They apparently, as according to the commentary and the documentaries, they only used 15 cameras. Right. Which is insane. 15 cameras, that's not a lot. Like, and so they had these doubles, and also Brad Pitt and Ellen was also on the shoot as well, and they had all these dots on their bodies, and then they were using David Fincher says he really doesn't like doing sex scenes, so he didn't really hates to do sex scenes. He's very uncomfortable with that. And so Brad Pitt kind of took over.
He says they're boring.
Yeah, exactly.
Because
he says
they just look all the same, or they look like photography.
Kama Sutra to find the positions. In total they did six scenes, 6 positions. They only used 4 for the film, but they experiment with these 6 positions with the 15 camera setup. It took a while to shoot because David Fincher would go through the cameras and refocus them and reorganize one by one, all 15 of them. Apparently, it was several days of shooting this. And again, no budget allocated for this shot. So these shots were just supposed to be a shot of them in bed. And then it became this entire photogrammetry flying through the armpit, going through the head and going through the thing.
But I think BUF can pull that off.
It's a commercial. It was like a
no
commercial.
Budget. There was obviously not no budget, but
but it was it wasn't allocated. Yes, they didn't. Here's a 300,000 for that VFX shot. That didn't exist, so he had to move things around to try to get it to work.
It's incredibly memorable because it doesn't look like any sex scene.
And it's been imitated and replicated by so many different films afterwards. I can't really emphasize how cool it was at the time, because not only because it was a fantastic way of showing orgasms and sex in an artistic and very stylized way. In fact, the film doesn't have any sex. That's it. That's the scene. And you don't really see sex on the film. You can't tell. But the motion blur and the camera rotating, the experimentation, it made it really huge. The scale, they look huge. And then the frozen nature of the motion blur together with the smoke of cigars, it's just a very artistic shot. It's reminiscent of a video art piece more than a film scene. It's really an artistic piece.
It's one of my faves for sure in the film.
It's a beautiful shot.
Yeah.
And Ellen Gunnar Carter, she talks on the commentary that she she was really surprised. She didn't knew that was how it would look. When they went to the premiere and they saw the film, that's actually a running theme on the crew. The DOP and the VFX supervisor and the actors. They all say the same, that they went to see the movie and they felt, did we do this? Like, they didn't really realize what they've done. The DOP even says, well, this is the first time I've watched the movie on the cinema where I was surprised. Because he says, oh, we usually go and see the movie, you already know everything, it's already spoiled for us. But this was like I was gripped, like I never even knew what the film was, like, because the film had so many of these shots and VFX plates and the editing and the flashbacks and the way the film was organized and constructed, it really became a surprise even for the people involved on the film, which is really funny. And that scene, don't even imagine, because they shot it with the dots on the day with the 14 cameras. They had no idea what was going to be there. Like they probably thought, what are these people doing? Like they didn't even understood what was going on.
Yeah. Well, that's BUF again. And the only other final thing that I remember reading about this sequence was they didn't really know how to do it. No. So although we're talking about BUF and photogrammetry and all that sort of thing, there was at some point they thought, well, we'll probably just have to have CG bodies. So I think Kevin, the overall VFX designer, he got a bunch of studios to do tests. And I'd love to know who the studios were that did the tests, or I'd love to see the tests. And of course, BUF's test was the thing that convinced them to do it that way. But I am slightly obsessed. Here's another obsession of mine with that period of like the mid 90s to the early 2000s, where the filmmaker or the writer had these ideas, but they had no idea how it would be brought to the screen. And visual effects studios ended up being crucial to like sometimes greenlighting films, but also doing these tests to prove that they could, do some kind of imagery that no one has ever seen before. Yeah. That was often the goal, right? Yeah. We don't want to see anything we've seen before. So there's just this amazing world of tests out there from the 90s.
This is a very... I'm obsessed with those as well. I would wish that we would see them. Maybe someday they will come over on some festival that we visit. Maybe a guest in the future of the VFX Notes Podcast at FMX will bring us more tests and more clips. But I feel this was happening with BUF. It was happening with ILM, the Mill in London as well, which I've been part of. And I remember watching tests at there. The Mill has like archives, and they have like files inside the company, and a lot of people that've been there since day one, so a lot of the flame ops have been there since it opened. And so it used to do a lot of those things, tests for specific music videos, tests for specific sequences. Yeah. And then they would lose the job, or they would not even be involved, or the budget wouldn't come through. And I'm sure that's the case. I wouldn't be surprised if they even did a test for this, because apart from BUF doing these kind of things, the Mill at the time was very well known for doing weird stuff, especially with the work they were doing with Chris Cunningham and with Michel Gondry, with all those directors at the time, and Romanak as well. And so that was like, there was a couple of companies in the world that could pull this off, because they had, not only they had that experimentation side where we don't know how to do it, but fuck it, we're going to try it anyway. But the artists in these companies, they were artists, they were hardcore artists. They were like very much video artists, really, and wizards, really. Like they were making up stuff as they come along. As they sometimes talk, both Kevin, Mac, and some of the VFX artists on this project on the commentary talk about that. Like, we didn't know how to do it, so we spent a couple of weeks programming something and doing a plugin for this or a script for that, and then it worked. They were just never. It wasn't really off the shelf, these things. You couldn't.
No, it was just changing, wasn't it? Even Maya was only really just coming in now. Yeah. Houdini was around, but you mentioned Kevin Mack there. Yeah. So that was Digital Domain's VFX soup on the film. And one of the sequences DD did, they did the opening titles, Into the Brain stuff, which I think has always been fantastic. Yeah. And, they'd done some awesome stuff with L systems for What Dreams May Come. And I think they did some L systems stuff for the brain neurons firing and all that.
Yeah.
But the thing I wanted to mention was the plane crash.
Yeah.
Again, it's only short in the film, but highly impactful. I think it actually influenced plane crash shots in films and TV shows for decades, right?
Yeah.
Essentially, here you've got Ed Norton in the plane, imagining a plane crash. He was shot motion control. Some of the passengers were also filmed motion control. One of the passengers happens to be Kevin Mack.
I know.
Like, and not just like at a whim. That was
He's
like a
there
really
for like several seconds.
Yes, it was like a really important thing.
Shaking.
I don't know what that was about. Fincher and whoever, they really wanted him in the sequence.
Yeah, and they threw all sorts of things at his face,
Yeah.
and even broke his glasses and everything. Yeah, he actually got hurt of getting so much debris thrown at him. That sequence really holds up. Like that sequence is photoreal.
Yep.
There is no moment on that sequence except on the very beginning when the plane is about to crash the window. When you see it from the outside window, you kind of notice the janky radiosity reflection kind of thing going on. But once it hits, it looks photoreal.
Yeah.
That is a stunning shot to this day.
I think part of it is also you're inside the plane, not necessarily with a shaky camera, even though the things are moving about and shaking. Yeah. So you're in the moment. You know, that's the shot design works. And once again,
they filmed a lot on set as well, and that's why it works so well.
Yes,
that's why. Like the marry of the two things is what really works here.
Yeah. Once again, PLF did the tech viz previz for that, and then the motion control shoot, and then whatever DD did in terms of, well, they basically got a background environment because bits of the plane have come off. They've got chairs that needed to be CG modeled and ripped off, and they've got debris. Bits of plane,
which they were so obsessed about the debris filming it as separate plates.
Oh yeah,
and like the oxygen masks and the little debris flying through, they were obsessed. Oh, we need to film all these little things, and literally it's like blurs on the image. You don't even see them.
That's true.
Like the oxygen mask actually is quite funny because they shot them as elements, and first they had one, and then they had two, and then they had three, and then David Fincher was like, so cool to see them hanging. Let's just put them all. And so there's oxygen masks on every seat. Like the whole thing is just like moving around. I think that sequence is really a testament to how well made it was. At the time, David Fincher and Brad Pitt and Edward, they talk about that on the commentary. They were like saying, well, we never see a crash inside the plane.
Yeah.
We never see it.
Yeah.
And so that's what they thought. Why don't we show that?
Yeah.
And that's where that genesis came from. And I guess every other film ever since has been like that's been the inspiration, I'm sure.
Yes, especially if you're trying to depict the terror of it in someone's mind.
Especially like people being swapped out, and you actually see these seats then being flushed out of the window. Yeah. And then you see the landscape of the city with the street lamps and everything. It's really scary. Also, the sound design is just stunning. And the sound this film has those moments like where the sound goes to 11. It's so high, it shakes the cinema. And then it just goes really low again. Yeah. It's really, really cool. And that sequence is one of those. It really scares you really a lot.
I've always loved that plane crash, and DD did a terrific job on it. Kevin Mack, you are a stunning actor on it as well. So congratulations. Yeah. What should we talk about next, Hugo?
Well, I would love to talk about high-rise collapse. I know we're going backwards and forwards, but it doesn't really matter. We're not doing it by chronological order in the film. The high-rise collapse, I really wanted to talk a little bit about because the whole thing starts with the translight. It was supposed to be a translight with a painting with the buildings outside, and that was done. Although, funnily enough, they were so afraid of being sued by the credit card companies, they couldn't really use those buildings. Yeah. So the translight painting is only made by Fox buildings.
Yeah.
Right. So they use several photos of Fox buildings all over scattered through the United States to build like that skyline, which is quite funny. But that sequence is really stunning, especially because we need to understand that I know everyone has Houdini now, okay? And so a simulation is easy, and doing a simulation is really, I'm not saying it's easy, but it's, at least you have tools for that. At the time, there was no tools for this. So, and there was no budget for this shot either. And so, and so Doc Bailey was on this shot alone. He was doing this shot by himself for an entire year.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that just fascinates me.
Yeah.
I didn't know this until I recently saw the 10-year anniversary documentary. And he literally built the debris, the explosions, the glass, the pieces of debris breaking. He did them by hand, one by one. He had the CG, and then he broke it all, and then he reversed engineered it to go back into place again, piece by piece.
I think, yes.
And this is mind-blowing.
Yeah. Doc Bailey was a rare kind of visual effects artist supervisor from that era.
Yeah.
Who he was also responsible for the glass breaking in the game.
Yeah.
That you mentioned before.
Yeah.
And just, it's probably this artistic side of visual effects that we've talked about already with BUF that meant that he was the perfect person to come on board from Kevin to do it. And it probably benefited that you're not necessarily up close to those buildings.
I know,
always.
Of course.
But that's also a shot design thing that's really lovely to have the silhouettes of Helena Bonham Carter and Ed Norton there.
And the on-set lighting, all of it being physical, and then the glass as well.
Yeah.
No, it's beautiful. And it became a huge problem as well because they filmed them over black and they all dressed black. And so, and I know now people think, oh, that's easy to roto, but not in 98. Like,
no, I'm not sure how that was even done.
Well, they spent several weeks rotoscoping it by hand, basically inventing where the edge would be, especially the jacket of Ellen, which was like this feather thing with like it's nuts. But I know what you mean. This is like a bespoke artistic piece where he basically animated the glass and the breaking going by hand. And so he transferred what we usually see as hand animation into this. And so it looks like a simulation, but it's really made by someone that knows how to animate. That's the thing. It's
and it's a really interesting approach because maybe another way to do this is totally by miniatures, right? Yeah. And they did film some miniature elements.
Yeah, the puffs of smoke and the main explosion was miniatures.
Yeah. Yes, and I think maybe Fincher, partly his ILM experience or partly just what he envisaged for the shot, was, okay, if we film miniatures, it's going to cost a certain amount and we might not get what we want.
Yeah.
And it also, we have to go and shoot it. Yeah. Whereas I can give it to Doc Bailey and he
just stays there in the corner of the room.
Yeah.
Well, apparently was there, like, they didn't have budget to do this complex scene. Because I guess they could have used the same simulation technology they used on Star Wars Episode 1, Twisters. I mean, it existed, technology, but it was probably going to cost a lot of money. And it was going to be cheaper to just hire him as part of the crew, and he was there on the computer for a year. And that's it. Like, that's probably how you can nudge in the budget into that,
I reckon the budget stuff didn't come into play as much as we might think it does. It was more an artistic,
for him to be there for a year. That's the thing. It's not very common for an artist to just be a year there. And obviously I'm not sure. I would love to ask Doc Bailey if he thought it was worth it or not, but because when he first started, on the game, he had 5,000 pieces to break by hand, and he thought that he says on the commentary, I think it was going to be probably 20,000 or 50,000 pieces. Ended up being 4 million.
Yeah.
And so it's like, and I'm sure he's like, oh, what did I do? Like, he was like on the computer, like, yeah, I'm 5% done. And like, this is a huge labor of love. And this sequence, not only it looks beautiful, it looks photoreal, because of the combination, the real explosions shot on black, of the hand animation, of the actual real shoot with lighting interaction, that's all beautiful. but also from a story point of view, it's just a brilliant way of finishing the movie, because the Pixies music comes along. It starts exactly on cue with the explosion. They're looking at this spectacle in front of them exploding. The film is really having almost like this beautiful ending because it's like supposedly a good ending because he doesn't die.
Yeah.
And so it just blows me away how this, no pun intended, I'm sorry. It just blows me away how this sequence came to be, how this doesn't exist anymore. One single artist made this in CG. It's just
Yeah.
It's really great.
Yeah.
I love this sequence.
Doc Bailey's work incredible. We should point out that, and I think it kind of was in the whole film, that sometimes one artist or studio would tackle a certain part of a shot. Say here the CG.
Yeah.
There's a compositing side of this, of course, that was done by multiple artists, but led, I think, by Gray Marshall.
Yeah.
Which is he ran a really cool boutique visual effects studio called Gray Matter Effects for a number of years.
Yeah.
And did the comp on here. And then, then they had to hire like a roto person to solve that Helena Bonham Carter stuff. But I think in the Cinefex, I read that Kevin Tod Haug had this idea of vertical visual effects shot production, not horizontal.
Yeah.
Meaning, you can actually throw different companies at different stages of a visual effects shot and work together and collaborate like that. They kind of do that today to some degree. I would say not. You don't really get ILM doing the CG and then Weta compositing it when they share shots. Sure. But that was an interesting thing to read in the Cinefex about how Kevin was approaching the work here. But we should shout out the compa on this shot in particular.
Talking about this Cinefex, right? So this is a really, really detailed. Well, actually, they have the penguin on the back there. Actually, as well from Fight Club. It's a really detailed account of Fight Club's visual effects. It's funny that you're saying that about the single artist and the methodology. The few times in my life, in my career, where I had the possibility of doing that, of having fewer people for longer in a production, we did that a few times at the mill. We did that a few times at Sony, and I did that myself in my own company a few times, only a few times, because sometimes you can't do it because of timeline pressures. But if you have a lot of time, I really recommend people trying that, because having fewer artists on the production, but for longer, not only it develops a more creative side of the thing, because then the artist has ownership over the shot and he's like building it and thinking about it and developing it over time. But also you have, I feel, at least from the experience I've had from the two companies and my own company, it actually becomes cheaper as well. I feel like it's much better to just hire few people for a long period of time than having a really, really chaotic moment of having 100 people in 1 month trying to do something, because it's so difficult to manage. And so I miss that. I know I sound like an old man, but I miss that approach to VFX. The same way you would have a storyboard artist for months on a project, like an editor. An editor would be on a film for like a year, I kind of miss that way of having VFX artists involved on projects for so long. And I still try. I know I'm old school, but whenever I have the opportunity, I do that. I tell my client, can I have 7 months or 6 months? Can we do that instead? And we spread it out instead of having like a short amount of time to do something. I like that a lot. But yeah, I just mentioned the storyboard. Shout out to Peter Ramnsey, which is the storyboard artist in this film. You're probably going to see him at the view conference, I'm assuming.
Maybe.
He's always there.
Yeah.
But Peter Ramnsey, for those that don't know, he's the director of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. And he's actually on the documentaries. He's next to David Fincher doing the storyboards. And I'm assuming this is one of his first gigs, probably, isn't it?
I'm not sure, but he is the man, and he's responsible for many storyboards, from animated features to some visual effects ones as well. So, Peter, you did a great job on this, for sure. Hugo, you've showed the back of Cinefex there, which has Blue Sky's Penguin.
Yeah.
For so many years, Blue Sky advertised on the back of Cinefex often with that particular image, and I've just never forgotten the penguin. from Fight Club, a really great example of awesome CG animation that almost looked a bit like an animatronic, deliberately made to look like an animatronic, I think, after Fincher reviewed some of the earliest animation. But Blue Sky was this company, doing, and they had a sister company, VFX, at the time, and they sort of got bought by Fox and then, of course, became an animation studio. But they were doing some really, really, really cool cutting edge CG animation that was different from Pixar and different from ILM and different from some of the CG animation studios that came up in the late 90s there. But The Penguin, I totally loved it, didn't you?
Well, yeah, me too. Blue Sky is also very special for the fact that at least it's close to my heart because I have a lot of friends used to work there. Of course, unfortunately, it's closed now, but they also had a fantastic approach to CG where they had a very robust compositing department. They would be one of the few animation studios where they would not just render everything in CG. They would then pass along to compositing a lot of things and then have a very robust compositing department and do a lot of things in Nuke and a lot of things with projections, a lot of things with backgrounds. And so it was very different for Pixar, which was a more brute force approach where they would try to render,
But Blue Sky did have one of the early radiosity renderers, CGI studio, and they'd done this short film that I think won the short film Oscar called Bunny, by Chris Wedge. And Bunny kind of set the standard for how a CG character could look. Like just a look that every director, I think, wanted. And The Penguin had that, very cleverly shot in this sort of, I don't think it was a scaled down set, but it's basically Edward walking around in the cave, and I think it just works as a hallucinatory sequence again.
Yeah, it does. And also like it's really funny. It's one of the earliest times where I actually see stuffies and I see HDR spheres and gray spheres, and because you don't usually commonly see that on the documentary, on the Blu-ray, and you actually see them with the spheres. And they actually have several spheres, not just the HDR. They have several tonality gray spheres and white spheres, and I'm assuming they were still trying these things out because these days is like a lot less spheres.
We've talked about it a little bit on this other episode that's coming out about Phantom Menace, which is that John Knoll from ILM essentially invented the use of a chrome sphere and a gray sphere in a visual effects workflow. And he did that with Star Trek First Contact, but then used them in a big way on Phantom Menace. And today we're using them to unwrap HDRIs and to obviously get the lighting reference. We're using it in a bigger way than they were using it in the late 90s, which was basically to match colors, right? Weren't we? And
well, these days, we've now went to a phase now that now they are just used as a way of making a reference. When you do it in CG, you also put the spheres in the CG scene, and then you try to match the location of the sun and the light by rotating the sphere. And so basically you have that reference to match. That's why on the CG turntables, you sometimes have the spheres in CG down here. We don't really use it anymore to unwrap because the unwrapping now is made either by an HDR camera a 3D60 camera, or like I do, which is an 8mm lens on a 5D, and then you rotate and shoot 4 areas, and then you get like a 24. I for example use a 50 megapixel sphere to do the HDR, but for moving stuff you still need to use these spheres, and that's why you have big spheres. So because if it's moving, then you can't really take the photo. So it's definitely, it's funny to see it. That's the thing. I thought it was funny to see it because it's such a modern thing to see it. And I was like, oh, this is 98.
And they were doing it in 98. There weren't that many
like 26 years ago.
Yeah. And I think maybe Dennis Muren had used a white sphere for Casper.
We can say now that this is vintage technology then, because it's more than 20 years now.
It's so interesting that maybe VFX supervisors were talking amongst themselves, or maybe it got mentioned in Cinefex that John and Dennis were doing this, and
then they just
we're in a snowy white cave. Of course, I'm going to have a white.
I'm going to go to the garden center and just buy some spheres. That's probably what I'm really into. People used to do that. They used to buy these spheres that you would buy for your garden and use that. But of course, obviously now we have proper ones made. But the Penguin was amazing, especially because, there's three things that are major on this shot. One is the penguin itself, which, you're right. They made a photoreal one, moved like a penguin, was perfect. And David Fincher just looked at it and said, "Yeah, this is great, guys, but have you ever seen Mary Poppins?" and then they made it completely funny and slide. It's just an amazing thing. You have the photoreal penguin coming in, talking with Edward, but then you also have really high-end compositing, because there was a lot of problems with the set. The set was quite big. Edward Norton was quite tall, and the penguin, if it's a real scale penguin, became really tiny, and it was really difficult for the eye contact. And so they actually did some really advanced compositing where they made the cave shorter, and then comped the penguin higher and Edward's lower, and then covered his feet with the stone. A huge compositing job there.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the breadth.
That's right. And a fun thing about that is, as I said, Blue Sky had a sister company, VFX, which used to be called Video Image, and they had done some breath shots for Titanic a couple of years before, where people went into a cold room, and against black velvet they would talk the lines, and then you could extract the breath, and they had some left over.
From Titanic. I love that. I love that they keep saying leftover. Like if this is like you just have like a plate or something. It's so funny. There's 4 commentaries, and all the actors say, they used leftovers from Titanic. And then the writer, did you know you used leftovers from Titanic? And then it's just like no one actually understands. No, this is CG. It's not a leftover. You have to like render it. You have to like comp it in. You have to like do more work. It's not like we can go into the shop and I bought some bananas and I'm using them.
I think there's an urban myth that played out maybe on the set or in production, which was that it was actually Leonardo DiCaprio's breath from Titanic, which is of course not the case. I'm pretty sure it was a VFX employee going into the cold room doing the lines. I'm not sure about that. But, it sounds good to say, this is actually an element from...
the film just won all the Oscars. So it was like they would say and bounce around, this is like Titanic technology. Like that's the word they should have used. This is Titanic technology.
Yeah. Very convincing, because VFX had mastered it on Titanic and then knew the kind of way of kissing it in, I suppose. But I always love the penguin sequence.
It's really a great sequence. I love it as well, and I really like what they did. Blue Sky did an amazing job with animation, because it feels like an animatronic. It feels like from another era, but it's CG. So it's really well hand animated. It's really really cool.
Hugo, what about the sequence of the narrator putting the gun in his mouth? I think,
oh my god,
that is the sequence that brought together a bunch of the different technologies that we're talking about. Photogrammetry, CG, but also they shot Ed Norton doing it, blowing crazy compressed air into his mouth.
They actually have the first take when they showed him, like it's on the Blu-ray, like they do the thing and it's like like you can see on his eyes like, Jesus, this is horrible. It's like really hard. And then just keep putting the pressure more and more. So I think it was quite hard for him to shoot that thing. This thing took a long time to test, because they first wanted to do it like the Matrix with a lot of cameras, and there was an idea of doing photogrammetry as well, but after a lot of testing, they ended up with a much more, I wouldn't say simple, but they ended up being a simpler setup, which was 5 Panavision cameras rigged together to make basically a curve around Edward Norton so they could capture this from multiple angles and then kind of like photogrammetry from there, but it was a full animation. And then, of course, you had blood splatters and the gun and also the bullet coming out as well. So a truly complex VFX shot brought from the reality of that shoot, but a lot of processing on top. So it's that shot is mind-blowing and really unexpected. Like you're watching the film and suddenly you have like this slow motion shot of someone blowing their brains out. I don't even think I've even seen anything like that before.
No, and it almost is too confrontational in a way.
Yeah.
I bet the idea was for it to be even more gory because they did get very famous makeup effects designer Rob Bottin to do a dummy.
Yeah.
It didn't really get used in the final.
But they really blow it up. Like there's a lot of gore on that thing.
Yeah, and so I think in the end it actually feels more real because it's not as gory as it
not like a horror movie or something.
Yeah.
Like one of those horror movies really from the 80s and the 90s. Yeah.
But the experimentation there of basically a frozen moment rig where they were going to use some high-speed film cameras, some photosonic cameras that didn't quite work with the rig, so they went back to those other cameras.
Yeah.
But then still using extracted geometric data from the photogrammetry shoot. Yeah. It sort of looks a little bit like a puppet in the end, but it's actually not. So that's what I think works. Again, it's a little bit stylized.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's also one of my favorite sequences.
Yeah, no, it is definitely this. I don't know. Like I think the VFX. It's really strange because the VFX shots on this film are very specific. They're all very different. You know, the collision and the this gunshot that we just mentioned, but they all have this grittiness and grunge feeling to them. You know, this shot, like you said, it's not very bloody, but it really hits hard. It really hits hard, and it's a beautifully well made shot. I even think it probably was very hard for people to watch it at the time. I'm sure because I don't think there's even been before this a shot where someone blow their brains out this close to camera. Usually what you do, you don't have a slow motion, you just have the hit and then the splatter on the head happens and that's it.
There was probably a few films after this where they felt like they could do that.
Well, Ian, you know, we could be here forever talking about Fight Club and then maybe the episode would be as long as the film. But we can't. But there's so many other shots I really want people to really go into. My favorite shot, there's not a lot of CG happening, but is the furniture shot. That shot...
Your favorite shot?
That's my favorite shot. Like, that shot was an obsession for me to a point that when I was in school and university, I did a shot like that.
Oh, wow.
I actually did a fake motion control. I didn't have a motion control, but I had to do it by hand, what we call a Spanish motion control, you know, like, and I tried to like pop in things, but this doesn't have a lot of CG. Actually, the only CG on this is the signs, but of course there's a rotoscoping of him going in between signs and behind signs and everything. But this shot is just amazing, and it's really complex. It has to do with CG because of the motion control, of course, because they had to like preset it before on a computer, and then the signs and rotoscoping. But it's so much harder than everyone thought when they were shooting it. And for the simple fact of manual bounce of color, which we now call about, you know, global illumination and radiosity and ray tracing, this is really difficult. As soon as you take a sofa out, every light on the entire lighting of the scene changes. And so it was an incredibly hard shot to do. A lot of compositing because of all the masking. Yeah. They had to like do soft matting and masking to then when they pop out something, it would also fade in and fade out the lighting interaction of that object. It's my favorite shot.
I do love the shot. It feels a little bit like a dalliance by Fincher because he can do it. That's maybe the only one in the film, but it's really cool. It actually even is the DVD menu
It is, yeah.
effectively.
Of the 10th anniversary, it is.
Yeah, and I think that's because it's such a memorable, cool looking
Yeah.
thing that suits a menu.
Well, it became obsessive for many, like so many commercials and so many
That's true.
films
You still
after
see
that.
it. You
Yeah,
still
see that kind of
Yeah,
stuff
yeah,
happening.
Yeah.
It became like a standard way of showing this kind of stuff. And just wanted to briefly mention, because it's my favorite shot. I know we need to wrap up, but I do think also we need to, like, we can't forget about, we haven't really talked about the opening credits. The opening credits is really a stunning piece of CG, and especially the way it was built and the way it was done, because this opening credit, which people probably don't even think much about, because, you know, credits are just credits and text passing through, but this is really hardcore, just like David Fincher does. You know, he hired an actual medical illustrator. You know, this was Catherine Jones. She built an entire Bible for this thing. There's like a book. I would love to have that book, where she goes into very high detail where, in fact, in the brain the camera should be flying through, and basically going through the lobes and then coming out of the air. And there's an entire book with all the framing, and frames of this book is on the DVD. So on the DVD, you can watch the entire scan of the book. It's all there. I'll put some frames while we're talking. But this is like not just the opening credit. This is a neuroscientifically correct vision of the brain.
I also do think it's fantastic. It goes to a slightly different time of going bananas with the opening credits in these films, and Fincher has them. My favorite opening credits for his film is Panic Room.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
It's different kind of approach.
Absolutely beautiful opening credits. Yeah,
but yes, DD, of course, we'd mentioned did the work on the actual modeling of this brain using different techniques, including L systems. But I'm gonna say it probably is one of those sequences that I almost want to just get straight into the movie.
I know what you mean.
I really like it, and it's beautiful.
I know what you mean.
It's kind of like
it's quaint, you know, like opening credits are a dying art. Really, it's not really happening anymore. Most films don't have an opening credit, and I think I understand what you mean, because it takes a long time and the names are passing through. But I love my favorite moment is the macro photography when we come out of his head.
It's beautiful,
and then go to the gun. That's my favorite section of it, and I feel that was really an important shot at the time. I feel I just wanted to really mention it.
And isn't it just so clever, like, to have that as the opening thing and go, what is going on, and then to bookend it.
And from a technology point of view, there's also a lot of advancements, because they couldn't really render all these cells in a go. So this is really the advent of instancing rendering, where you basically have only 5 or 6 cells, and then they basically have multiple instances in the background and throughout, mirrored, rotated, and so they are all the same, and so the computer only processes 5, but it looks like there's hundreds. And so that's also the start of that really clever methodology, which really saves a lot of render time to try to accomplish something like that, you know. So I really like that sequence, and I think it's a really, like, you know, a really famous sequence from the film as well.
Absolutely.
Especially with that Dust Brothers soundtrack kicking off, because it's really loud, the music in that section. So it's great. I just wanted to mention those two.
And importantly, a shot a sequence that shows digital domain at the height of its powers, actually, in a film that was not necessarily a big visual effects film, but we were sort of seeing at this point other visual effects studios that were taking on the might of ILM and you know, some of the studios that have been around for a while. I mean, that year, obviously, Mannix won the visual effects Oscar for Matrix, and the year before, Mannix had actually won for What Dreams May Come. Mannix went through a few different names. DD was on What Dreams May Come as well. Things were just changing at that time in visual effects. Only a year later, the Mill Film won for Gladiator. You know, things were moving and morphing in that area.
Absolutely.
Hugo, I've got just 2 more visual effects things I want to mention with the film. One was a really great work by Toybox, which did a lot of wire removals and sort of extra stuff. They were also involved in the CG ball, the rolling ball thing.
Oh, yeah.
Was it initially, I think, attempted as practical effects or miniatures. And Toybox was just a super cool company, I think, in Canada, that had some pretty big heavyweight players at the time. And then the other thing was, if you go and read the Cinefex for this film on Fight Club, there's all these names in it that I'm like, oh, I know that name of a compositor or a CG artist or a CG animator or whatever. And they're basically now visual effects supervisors.
Yeah.
And many of them are the
Kind of started in this movie.
Yeah, or were, at Digital Domain, which is, of course, was in LA, is in LA at the center of the visual effects universe. These are names like Dan Lemon, who's obviously went to Weta and is an amazing visual effects supervisor. Matthew Butler at DD. Sean Faden was at DD, and he's a VFX soup. Kevin Mack, we've already mentioned. I've like had this like, oh my God, that's so cool to read about them as completely different sort of artists, and they're now VFX soup. So it was a great little look down history lane for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this film is really on the cusp of it. I think that's the era, 96, 97, 98, 99. That's the time where the industry, as we know, really built in. Okay, so you had a few things. I have one last thing I just wanted to mention. It's not VFX, it's effects. I really wanted to just mention really quickly the fat suit from Meatloaf.
Oh, yeah.
Meatloaf, which is one of my favorite actors on this movie. He's amazing on the movie. I don't know if everyone realizes it. I realized this maybe like 5 years or 7 years after I watched the movie first time, when I listened to the commentary. So everyone thought Meatloaf, Meatloaf historically has always been very fat on his
big
music,
guy.
Always a big guy. And so they hired him, they casted him, and then he shows up and he's really thin.
He lost weight.
He lost a lot of weight. And so Brad Pitt was like saying, he's been struggling with weight for years. And so he's like, for a decade, he's been losing weight, and not a lot of people have been seeing him because he hasn't really been in the public mind. He comes on set, and then Fincher's like, oh, we need to get a fat suit for you. So they built this fat suit, this huge fat suit, which actually there's a shot on the film where by mistake his trousers go down and you see a bit of the fat suit, and then he's putting his trousers up. But they kept the shot because the rest it was on the background. The rest of the take was good. This fat suit, by the way, was really horrible to work with. It's really super hot, really heavy as well. So the guy has suffered a lot. And then these boobs were filled with grains, with bird food, like so that they have the weight on them. And the studio was so like, that was only one of the few things they said, do you really have to have the nipples? Because he has like the nipples out of them. I just wanted to mention this suit thing. Just so funny that he was too thin and they had to put him on a fat suit. I just really wanted to mention that because I don't think a lot of people, I still think a lot of people think he is like that. And they just put the boobs. That's it. I think they probably think, but it's a full fat suit, legs, arms, everything. So
wow, whole different kind of effects work there. Amazing. Well, Hugo, we weren't meant to talk about Fight Club, but we talked about Fight Club.
Yes, I know.
And it was really fun going through that with you. And happy anniversary to Fight Club.
I can't believe it's been
Fincher
25 years.
All the filmmakers.
Jesus Christ. I can't believe it's been 25 years.
Amazing.
Like, it's way, I'm so old. Just so you know how old I was, I bought this DVD. When I bought this DVD, I still remember to this day, was the second DVD I ever bought. I was on my way, in Portugal at the time when I was young, it was mandatory to go to the army. So I went to the inspection to see if I would go to the army or not. And then I went there and the guy looked at me, oh, you're an artist, right? Because I was in art school.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, okay. Then he just stamped for me to go away. He didn't even ask anything. He was like, oh, you're in arts. Oh, okay. And he stamped and I didn't have to go. And then I had all this free time. I went to the shops. We're waiting for my mother to pick me up. And then I bought this. I bought this DVD. That was on that day that I bought. The day I discovered I didn't have to go to the army for 6 months, and then I went to the art university. I think he probably just looked at me. He had I had this crazy hair, all gothic, all black, and like art school. No, you're not gonna fit in here.
Well, no, I'm gonna say Fight Club saved you from going to the army, Hugo. That's what happened.
Great, man. Well, this was so good to talk with you, and I love doing episodes with you in location, man. So you need to move to London.
I would. No, we'll keep doing episodes from me in Australia and Hugo in London, but whenever I'm over here, we always try and record one. Thank you for doing this, Hugo. Thanks everyone for watching. See you next time.
See you later. Bye.